This case study is focusing on face control in a better player, and I must stress that this is a better player characteristic that we're going to discuss here. Tom's a very, very talented player, plays on the Sunshine Tour and has been struggling recently with ball control, so he could either leave it out to the right or overturn it when he's trying to play a draw. Additionally, he's been struggling a little bit with strike, tending to get the ball a little high up the face, which would suggest that the low point is just a little bit too deep, with the occasional heavy shot coming in. So when I'm looking at face control issues in a good player, I'm going to go straight to wrist angles and explore why the face is arriving in a subtly different position on every shot. And Tom, historically, when he's on, he will hit the same shot time and time again. A very, very good, very consistent ball striker with speed. So there's clearly something going on that's resulting in that lack of face control. As I said, I'm going to tend to explore wrist angles when I'm looking at this. That's the first place my brain will go. So let's do a little bit of an analysis and explore exactly where the club is in space before we get to work on the elements that I think are responsible for this. So if we take the player down to P6, and as I said, he's an extremely good player, we can see that his hands are pretty much bang on the load lines on the left-hand side, and they've got a little bit lower, so straight away I'm thinking that that's going to be affecting the vertical strike point, the ball being struck slightly high up the face, and the divot being a little bit too deep. When you look at him from down the line as he works through the impact phase, we can see that the shaft returns to the shaft plane and exits bang on the shaft plane. But by the time he gets to P8, P9, what we can see is that the club is rehinged very, very quickly, and that there's also a high degree of face rotation involved in that as well. Now, when you start to add up these components, number one, the fact that the hands are so close to the load line just before impact, a little bit beneath the load line. Then we see the shaft leaving very much on the plane line and quite a lot of wrap over through the P8, P9 phase. We can already see at P8 that he's started to rehinge, and by P9 he's rehinged almost 90 degrees, which is a huge amount. Combine that with the face rotation, and we've now got an explanation as to why we're seeing the ball behave the way it does. We now need to explore why is it that we're seeing those face conditions and those characteristics in the golf club through impact. So when we take the player down to P5, there's two things that jump out at me straight away. The first is that the amount of radial deviation, or what we would call lag in a golfing sense, he creates, but also how much extension he's demonstrating in the back of the left wrist. Now, those two components always work together. The more extension you go into, the more radial you've got access to. And it's my understanding, it's my belief that this is what it was causing Tom those subtle inconsistencies in face position and impact. Now, when I measured him in hack motion, what we could see is that there is a huge degree of fluctuation in the extension flexion pattern. And the more fluctuation you have there, there's a direct link towards the where the face is at impact based on how much flexion extension the player demonstrates. And it's not possible to create this amount of lag without the wrist going into a significant amount of extension. So I really wanted to get to the bottom of why he demonstrated this characteristic. And the first thing I did was ask him to grip the club in the left hand only. As soon as he took left-hand grip, it was very obvious that the left thumb was too long. It was too much down the grip, meaning that it's separated from the forefinger, and that is a component that will always result in more wrist hinge and more extension. So the first change we made was to shorten up the left thumb. And straight away that gave him less mobility through the wrists, less of that extension flexion pattern, less of that radial deviation pattern, and straight away the ball flight tidied up and the strike tidied up. He started to hit little pull draws and all but eliminated the right shot that was bothering him. There's a very simple explanation for this, being that if he keeps the lead wrist in a little bit more flexion, or probably more accurate in this instance, a little less extension, the face is already a little bit stronger, the face is already a little bit more closed. So that's where we saw the pull draw pattern coming from. Now, what I want to highlight at this stage is the subtlety of grip position. So the long left thumb gave the player access to too much extension, too much radial, By shortening that up, by getting the left thumb and forefinger contacting further up the grip, he was straight away able to eliminate a little bit of this. Now, that wasn't the end of the lesson. We needed to explore other components just to push this a little further, but we've already had a little win just by shortening the left thumb. After we've shortened the left thumb, the next task is to push the feel a little bit more, create a little bit more structure in that lead wrist. So the before swing is on the left-hand side here, and we've already identified the characteristics that through this phase goes excessively into extension, and then we start to see that pull down and that amount of lag. So with the left thumb change, I wanted to, as I said, push the feel a little bit more. So I used a drill that I rely on quite a lot in this instance, and that is what I call the credit card drill. So I've got Tom to stick a credit card in the back of his left glove, so that gives him an awareness of how much flexion he does go into in that transition phase. Now, clearly, there's quite a lot of difference in top of backswing already. We've started to see that the player has responded to both the left hand change with the left thumb and also that using the credit card. As we get further and further down, we can see that the left wrist is staying much more in that flat condition, whereas by here we can see a huge amount of extension being delivered. Now, this is where we really started to see an improvement in the ball striking and the flight control. We started to see a consistent push draw. And I want to stress this as an example of using a task or a constraint. I know you all know that this is my heavy bias when coaching, but I've found with this particular drill, it's been incredibly useful for getting the player in a position to feel and work around their own change rather than me just saying keep the left wrist flat. And this is a drill we've done quite a lot in the past, and it always results in this player hitting better shots. So again, the other learning here is that that if there are drills that work for your players, consistently rely on them. Keep pushing the player to use those drills. Now, I also added in here an intent. I wanted him to focus on hitting high draw, just to keep away from that amount of pull down in the shaft, that excessive radial that he demonstrated through the transition phase all the way to impact. So we've now added left thumb, credit card drill to give him an awareness of the lead wrist, and asked him to hit high shots. All of these more externally focused than just asking him to keep the left wrist flat. This resulted in huge improvements through the impact phase. We can see the face rotation here is getting a little bit better managed, particularly straight after impact. And the ball flight, as I said, was starting to get much, much, much better. Finally, I'm going to take the player through a testing protocol. So we've made the change. We've got the player aware of what he needs to do to consolidate that change. And I want to see what it looks like when he's hitting different yardages and also hitting different clubs. So now we've moved into the testing phase of the lesson. I've set up a TrackMan test of 75 to 200 yards random. And the reason I'm doing this is to see how much of the change is stuck when the player starts to become a little bit more outcome focused. The before swing is on the left-hand side, and we've already discussed what happens through that lead wrist. Now, the other reason I wanted to use this as an example is that it gave me another coaching point. I thought that the end of the lesson would be when he'd completed a test, but actually it took us somewhere else. So this is him hitting a knockdown shot rather than a full shot, and we can see how different that structure is at the top of the backswing. Much better in the left wrist and much better in transition. So we can see, number one, that the player has made a very good change. He's been able to take the change to that variable testing environment. But this led me to think that, okay, well, maybe I'm going to give this player some pitch shot drills to help him integrate this change or these changes we've made into their swing more effectively. So the end of the lesson actually ended up being a pitching lesson where I'm asking him to make exactly this backswing and rip it from there. So create the shorter backswing with the better wrist structure and then generate speed from there. He really responded very well to this. So again, that was something we added to his practice, that from pitch swings, he's more able to create the wrist conditions that we're looking for. So let's recap. What have we learned from this? When we're dealing with face control with a better player, wrist angles are quite commonly the cause. This player demonstrating right and left misses and slightly heavy strikes. We also learn that you may need 2 or 3 different approaches. So first of all, the length of the left thumb was really important in this. Let's get that shorter. Then we started to give him some cues with the credit card drill. And then finally we asked him to exaggerate it just to really push the feel some more. That led us to the testing phase. He did a great job in the testing phase on every swing. I've videoed probably 7 or 8 of the 15 swings he made in test. And then we learned that actually from a pitch length backswing, he really got some great wrist conditions. That led to another coaching point that he was going to hit lots of pitch shots hitting it hard. Hope you found that helpful. If you get any questions, please post in the comments. I'd like to add a final point to this case study, and that is how the player has processed the feel. So we've talked about how we shortened the left thumb, used the credit card drill. Now, interestingly, as the player worked through this, he felt the biggest change came through his trail wrist. And if you look at the difference in the trail wrist position in the before and after, there's a significant amount more extension in the trail wrist. Now, while the focus was the left wrist through the session, as we worked through this, hit more and more shots, what we found was the player's feedback was increasingly coming from the trail wrist. And this, I think, is an important learning point for all of us, that while we're fixing the problem here, we've actually worked in the other wrist to really nail the change. So it's important that we get the player's feel feedback as we work through this. And clearly we have a significant change in the amount of extension through that trail wrist. That ultimately has helped him put the club in a much, much better position. So the learning point here, once you've identified the change, made the change, start to talk to the player about where they are feeling the change. In this instance, the left wrist got fixed by working on the right wrist.